While young Sheldon's penultimate episode was arguably the Big Bang Theory spin-off's most ambitious outing, its experimental style was in service of a tragic character detail. Broadly speaking, young Sheldon was not particularly interested in formal experimentation. Some sitcoms, like 30 Rock and Community, are stuffed with meta-gags that lean on the fourth wall. Acknowledge the fourth wall. Acknowledge the show's status as a TV show, and play with familiar television conventions to subvert audience expectations. In contrast, young Sheldon's cast of characters provided most of the show's laughs. And, broadly speaking, the series was a traditional single-camera family sitcom with the usual tropes. There was an adult narrator recalling their childhood, a dysfunctional but loving family, and an older character who was comically brazen and outspoken. Young Sheldon's stories were original and fun, but their formula was familiar thanks to shows like The Wonder Years, Everybody Hates Chris, and Malcolm in the Middle. That said, young Sheldon's series finale subverted expectations by playing with the show's formula. The final episode, Season 7, Episode 14, Memoir, introduced the show's narrator as an on-screen character. But it was the preceding episode that pushed young Sheldon's boundaries and showcased the spin-off's surprising ambition. Young Sheldon's penultimate episode, Funeral, focused on the funeral of Sheldon's father, George Sir. The event impacted the entire Cooper family, but Funeral was particularly invested in how Sheldon coped with the tragedy internally. Funeral proved just how much Sheldon struggles with reality, as the show's title character spent the entire episode replaying his final conversation with his father in his mind. This was an atypically risky, ambitious storytelling gambit for such a conventional series, but it was one that paid off in an outing that could rival young Sheldon's best episode when it comes to heartbreaking storytelling. Watching Lance Barber's George Sir and Ian Armitage's Sheldon repeatedly go through new iterations of the same scene was trippy by young Sheldon standards, but it was also a perfect illustration of Sheldon's unique grief. Whenever young Sheldon cut back to his grieving family, who grew increasingly frustrated with him staring into space, the title character's plight became more tragic and moving. Funeral proved something that the Big Bang Theory avoided acknowledging, and young Sheldon danced around for years. Namely, Sheldon isn't a thoughtless or callous person, but rather someone who sees the world differently and can't help that fact. Sheldon couldn't contend with the fact that a bland exchange of pleasantries was his last interaction with his father, so he was stuck in a loop, coming up with new endings for their conversation. Young Sheldon's finale made Sheldon's character arc sadder by confirming that much of the character's supposed arrogance was rooted in a need to control his surroundings and feel a sense of order in his world. Funeral saw young Sheldon invite viewers to see how Sheldon's way of processing the world impacted his relationships with family and friends, and it was surprisingly poignant to watch. Sheldon's unique grief alienated him from his sister Missy, when his looping thoughts made him appear distracted during George Sir's funeral planning. His inability to understand the sentimental significance of his father's empty chair led to awkward, angry confrontations with Georgie, much like Missy's inability to understand the jokes at young Sheldon's George Sir. Funeral resulted in her feeling like his memory was being insulted. Sheldon's struggles with looping thoughts made him more sympathetic than ever before. They proved that the Big Bang Theory's hero wasn't intentionally acting obstinate, but trying to make sense of the world around him. While Sheldon was certainly conceited, it was arguably unfair for the Big Bang Theory to treat this as a straightforward character flaw. Judging by the events of Funeral, he was seemingly genuinely unable to see things from another point of view. Seeing him struggle to accept his last conversation with his father was a poignant reminder that he had a hard time contending with reality when it failed to meet his expectations. Mima and Sturgis's young Sheldon relationship touched on similar themes when the theoretical physicist's years of work in abstract academia resulted in a breakdown and period of mental ill health.